What if I told you the moment the world has speculated about for years has already happened behind closed doors? No grand proclamation, no televised ceremony, no coronation confetti or gold coach rides, just a quiet meeting, a signature, a sealed document, and a crown passed from father to son with barely a whisper. They said King Charles would reign for decades, fulfilling the long-awaited destiny denied him in youth. But in the span of one chilling night, marked by whispered prayers, urgent calls, and unspoken fear, everything changed. Because when the monarch can no longer carry the weight of the crown, someone must step forward. And this time, it wasn't just anyone. It was William, and he was ready. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But are we? Are we ready to accept that the man who spent most of his life in the shadow of his parents' wreckage, Princess Diana's ghost and Charles's scandal, is suddenly at the helm of a monarchy on the verge of collapse or rebirth? Are we prepared for the wave of consequences that come with an abdication cloaked in secrecy? More importantly, why didn't they want you to know? Because this wasn't supposed to leak. According to insiders, it was supposed to be a long, carefully curated transition, dressed in PR gloss and royal silence. A soft handover masked as shared duties. But something happened. A shift. A health crisis that no amount of palace spin could contain. And so, they moved. Swiftly, quietly, ruthlessly. And you haven't even heard the worst of it. See, while the public saw King Charles smiling, waving, attending engagements in muted colors and pressed suits, his inner circle was scrambling. Behind the scenes, his doctors were on high alert. His schedule was being redacted at an alarming rate. At least 3 major overseas visits were canceled without explanation. Then came the mystery meeting at Sandringham. Just Charles and William. No aides. No press. No Camilla. That night would change everything. But here's where things get twisted. This wasn't just about Charles. No, it was also about who stood in the wings. Not Harry. Not Anne. Not even Camilla. It was William. And according to multiple sources, he didn't hesitate. Not this time. Because for years, William was framed as reluctant, as someone who didn't want the crown. He said it himself. But now? Now he's stepping into the spotlight with a level of precision that has stunned even his fiercest critics. His allies are lining up. His enemies are staying unusually quiet. And the machine around him, the one built to preserve royal continuity, is already in motion. And yet, the world has no idea. Why? Because of one word: optics. They want you to see a family slowly transitioning, not a crumbling monarchy facing an emergency succession. They want images of unity, not desperation. Smiles, not strategy. But beneath that carefully curated Instagram feed lies a volcano ready to erupt. And we're about to take you straight into the fire. Let's talk about what you haven't seen. About the royal events that were abruptly canceled, only to be explained away with vague health concerns. About Charles's uncharacteristic absence from diplomatic calls. About that peculiar delay in the state opening of Parliament. And the bizarre presence of William in a more commanding role than protocol should allow. Let's talk about the fact that William has already started meeting foreign leaders without his father. That his speeches are no longer just assisting. They're leading. That there are whispers, yes, whispers, that his first address to the nation has already been drafted. And most chilling of all, sources inside Clarence House claim Charles has already signed a letter of abdication. Not a public announcement, not an official declaration to Parliament, but a private document, delivered to key members of the Privy Council, sealed with a crimson stamp, and waiting for the right moment. But why the secrecy? Because the monarchy isn't just a symbol. It's a machine, a system of tradition, influence, money, diplomacy, and one wrong move can cause that machine to implode. Abdicating a throne is no small matter. It hasn't been done willingly since Edward VIII. And we all know how that ended. Scandal, shame, exile. And so, Charles is walking a tightrope. Officially, he's resting. Unofficially, he's finished. And the palace is scrambling to control the narrative before the truth leaks, before the world realizes a generational shift has already occurred. But here's where it gets personal. Because while William may be ready, not everyone supports him. Behind palace walls, a quiet civil war is brewing. Princess Anne, steadfast, disciplined, the late Queen's most trusted confidant, is reportedly furious at being excluded from the transition planning. Prince Edward is said to be deeply conflicted. And Camilla? Oh, Camilla is livid. She fought for decades to gain acceptance, to stand beside Charles not just as a wife, but as a queen. And now, she's been left in the shadows of a throne she helped stabilize, only to see it handed to the son of the woman who once haunted her. And then there's Harry, the brother left out of the loop. Not consulted, not warned, not even given the courtesy of a call before the succession machinery began to churn. And when he found out, sources claim he exploded, furious, blindsided, and heartbroken. Because even as he stood thousands of miles away in California, Harry always held on to a quiet hope that someday, somehow, the brothers might reconcile. That when the time came, they'd share the burden. But that hope has been shattered. Why? Because William made his move. Alone. And not just with personal resolve, but with institutional backing. Insiders say he has the full support of the Crown Estate, key bishops, the Lord Chamberlain, and even several senior MPs. There are whispers that Commonwealth leaders have already been briefed, that military leaders have been asked to prepare for ceremonial changes, that a new set of royal portraits is already being painted, ones that show William, Catherine, and their children as the new royal family. And yet the public remains in the dark. For now. But cracks are forming. TikTok sleuths have already picked up on discrepancies in William's recent public appearances, certain insignia, subtle nods in protocol, Kate's altered title on event programs. Twitter threads are exploding with speculative breakdowns. Reddit forums are lighting up with decoded timelines. And journalists? They know something's wrong. They just can't say it yet. Because if the story breaks too early, it shatters the carefully laid foundation of the palace's strategy. It turns a noble transition into a scandalous upheaval. It risks exposing the monarchy not as a stable institution, but as a family gripped by internal chaos. And that's the real danger. Because the moment the public senses instability, the calls for republicanism grow louder. The monarchy needs a clean, seamless handover, one that honors Charles without exposing weakness. But behind the curtain, the seams are splitting. And William? He's no longer just the Duke of Cambridge. He's the Shadow King. He's taking meetings alone, making decisions with prime ministers, reviewing documents with the Lord Chancellor. He's begun controlling the royal schedule, issuing directives, attending rehearsals. Yes, rehearsals, for a future that may already be present. And all of it in silence. Until now. Because the truth is leaking. The curtain is slipping. And the question isn't whether Charles has abdicated. It's how long they can keep pretending he hasn't. And what happens when the truth finally explodes. But what William said to Charles during that final moment, the whisper that reportedly brought the king to tears, that's the line that could haunt this monarchy forever. And that's where we begin. What could a future king possibly whisper to his father, the reigning monarch? That would bring tears to the eyes of a man who has waited 70 years for the crown. Was it an expression of love? A plea for peace? Or was it something darker, something that confirmed what many behind palace walls had feared all along? We don't know the exact words, but we do know what happened next. Within 24 hours of that private meeting at Sandringham, multiple royal engagements were quietly removed from the official calendar. Palace insiders were instructed to hold all future correspondence pending a strategic review. Senior aides who had been in near constant contact with King Charles were suddenly rerouted to Clarence House under William's office. And perhaps most ominously, Charles himself vanished. Not metaphorically, literally. No photos, no waving from Range Rovers, no balcony appearances, no grainy shots from Windsor. Nothing, just a blackout. And when the king re-emerged 4 days later, the change in him was undeniable. Gone was the sprightly monarch who'd shaken hands, greeted diplomats, and cracked polite jokes with charity patrons. In his place stood a thinner, paler man, his movements slower, his expressions more distant. He walked with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. His smile faltered mid-sentence. At one event, he had to be subtly supported by an aide after stepping down from a podium. The official statement? A minor seasonal virus. The truth? Sources say it was something far worse. So what exactly is going on with King Charles's health? Let's take a closer look. Over the past year, several alarming signs have emerged. each dismissed by palace PR as routine or age-related. But strung together, the pattern is too precise to ignore. Let's start with his hands. For decades, Charles has had notoriously swollen fingers, dubbed sausage fingers by tabloids and even joked about by the king himself. But recently, observers noticed something different. Not just swelling, but discoloration, bluish hues, tremors, even a visible shake when lifting a glass during a recent engagement in Scotland. Next came the speech slurs. At a November state dinner, Charles's usually crisp delivery became noticeably garbled. He fumbled names, misread a few lines, then awkwardly paused for several seconds, enough to cause discomfort among guests and confusion among aides. No correction followed. No acknowledgement. The moment was scrubbed from the official footage. Then came the cancellations. In the span of 6 weeks, Charles quietly pulled out of multiple key events, including 2 that were longtime royal staples: the Commonwealth Day service and the annual diplomatic reception at Buckingham Palace. The excuses varied: logistical complications, schedule conflicts, and yes, again, a seasonal bug. But royal watchers noticed something chilling. Every time Charles canceled, William stepped in, and not just as a placeholder. He wasn't delivering a short speech and leaving. He was presiding over state banquets, leading audiences with ambassadors, hosting foreign dignitaries solo. That's not standard delegation. That's succession rehearsal. And it wasn't just happening on camera. Off camera, Charles's medical team reportedly escalated their recommendations. According to an anonymous NHS-connected source, Charles was quietly admitted to a private wing of the London clinic for what was described as long-form diagnostics. That means full body scans, blood work, potential biopsy reviews. This wasn't a flu checkup. This was a full-blown royal medical crisis. So why the silence? Because palace tradition demands it. When Queen Elizabeth II became ill in her final year, the public knew almost nothing. Statements were vague. Appearances were rare. Even her death came with shockingly little preamble. Royal protocol dictates that the monarch's health is not discussed in specifics, only broad, palatable euphemisms. Mobility issues, under the weather, following medical advice. But according to multiple insiders, Charles's condition is progressing. One aide, speaking on background, said, "He's weaker than they're letting on. This isn't a temporary thing. This is long-term. Degenerative. Degenerative. Think about that word. Not manageable. Not treatable. Degenerative. What conditions fall under that umbrella? Parkinson's, certain forms of cancer, autoimmune diseases, neurological disorders like ALS, the kind of illnesses that don't get better, only worse. And if that's the case, the question isn't just when Charles might abdicate. The question becomes, has he already? Let's go back to that sudden absence in late October. It wasn't just a break. It was total radio silence. And for a man who, since his ascension, has made royal visibility a top priority, that disappearance set off alarm bells. During those missing days, reports indicate that Charles was in the company of just 3 people: his private secretary, his lead physician, and William. No Camilla, no Anne, no courtiers, just the king, his heir, and the men tasked with managing his body and legacy. It's believed that during this period, Charles was briefed on his prognosis, that he was told, in no uncertain terms, what the road ahead would look like. And that's when something shifted. Because just days later, William's movements changed dramatically. He began attending briefings usually reserved for the monarch. He was spotted leaving an MI5 secure facility. He canceled an upcoming private holiday with his family in Norfolk, without explanation. He was seen holding a thick red dispatch box outside of Kensington Palace. And most tellingly, his title usage changed. On several official documents, William was referred to not just as Prince of Wales, but as the regent of the realm. Now that is not ceremonial language. That's constitutional. Because under the Regency Acts, laws that define how a royal successor can temporarily assume sovereign powers, a regent can be appointed if the monarch is deemed unfit to perform duties due to mental or physical incapacity. It's happened before. George III was declared unfit, and his son, later George IV, was appointed Prince Regent. So is history repeating itself? Some believe it already has. According to a senior legal figure close to the Crown Office, a document, signed by Charles and witnessed by 2 privy councillors, was filed with royal archives in early November. The contents remain classified, but those familiar with the procedure say it resembles the paperwork required for a temporary abdication under Regency law. And if that's true, then William is, for all intents and purposes, the acting monarch. But why not just say it? Why not go public? Because abdication is a word laced with scandal. The last time a monarch willingly abdicated, it plunged the country into constitutional crisis. Edward VIII gave up the crown for love. The church revolted. Parliament panicked. The monarchy barely survived. Charles knows that history, and he's not interested in repeating it. So instead, he may have chosen a hybrid path. One that allows him to step back quietly, while William steps forward publicly. A private abdication. A silent handover. One that gives Charles the dignity of retreat without the chaos of formal abdication. And William? He's not wasting time. In the past month alone, he's taken private meetings with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, hosted the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and initiated a closed-door briefing with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's issued statements that refer to my future reign and the responsibilities of sovereign leadership. He's begun reviewing state papers. He's even instructed his staff to begin work on the first 100 days plan, a blueprint traditionally reserved for newly crowned monarchs. This isn't speculation. This is succession in motion. So what does that mean for the public? It means that every appearance William makes from now on is deliberate. Every handshake, every speech, every symbolic gesture. It's all part of a larger strategy to acclimate the country to a new king without saying the word king. It means that Charles's appearances will become increasingly rare and increasingly scripted. Expect shorter engagements, pre-recorded messages, carefully managed photo ops, a slow fade from public life disguised as recovery. And it means that a new royal era is already upon us. Not next year, not after a funeral, now. But of course, not everyone is thrilled. Because while the palace may be coordinating the smoothest transition in modern royal history, others see it differently. Some see deception, secrecy, a manipulation of public trust. And those voices are growing louder. And one of them is about to speak publicly. A former royal staffer, a man who worked intimately with Charles, a man who claims to have seen the original abdication letter with his own eyes. And what he's about to reveal could expose everything the palace has tried to bury. What happens when a man raised in duty finally steps into destiny? For most of his life, Prince William existed in a paradox. Publicly exalted, privately scrutinized. Groomed to one day rule, yet constantly overshadowed by drama not of his own making. His parents' toxic marriage, his brother's rebellion, his wife's intense media exposure. Through it all, William maintained an image of stoic detachment. Calm, reserved, almost robotic. But that was before the shift. Before the private whispers in palace corridors turned into blunt truths. Before Charles's body began betraying him and the monarchy needed someone, anyone, ready to lead. And William? He answered with silence. Not reluctance, not enthusiasm, just focus. Quiet, unshakable focus. So when exactly did he begin preparing to become king in all but name? Not when Charles ascended, not even when Elizabeth passed, but much earlier. According to insiders, William's real transformation began in secret. Nearly a year ago, and the first sign? He disappeared. Not publicly. He still smiled for cameras, still toured schools, shook hands, gave speeches. But privately, he went dark. Royal aides noted he began declining social engagements. He pulled back from extended family functions, even skipping certain holiday events. He became, as one source put it, militaristic in schedule, monk-like in temperament. Something was happening behind closed doors. And then came the first unannounced meeting. Held not in London, but in a secure wing of the Windsor Castle estate. The attendees? William, 2 retired constitutional lawyers, a private MI6 liaison, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Why? Because if a monarch becomes incapacitated, physically or mentally, the transition to the next sovereign isn't just ceremonial. It's legal and complex. William was learning what Charles hadn't taught him. The burden of kingship not just as duty, but as bureaucracy, negotiation, and strategy. This wasn't a crash course. It was an overhaul. One former courtier claimed William conducted more constitutional briefings in 3 months than Charles did in a decade. He wanted no ambiguity, no reliance on aides, no room for manipulation. And it didn't stop there. According to a leaked schedule, William began meeting monthly with foreign intelligence officials, MI5, MI6, GCHQ. His focus? Cybersecurity, foreign diplomatic pressure, threats to Commonwealth stability. Why? Because the future monarch isn't just a figurehead anymore. In a digitized world, he's a target, a symbol of national resilience or vulnerability. William was preparing for war, not the kind fought on battlefields, but the kind fought through headlines, scandals, cyber leaks, and political turbulence. He also began shadowing high-level economic advisors, attending treasury briefings, reviewing climate change strategies and carbon policy transition plans. He wasn't waiting for a throne to be handed to him. He was building the throne, brick by strategic brick. And while the public saw his stoic face at events, his inner circle saw something else: intensity. A shift in posture, sharper language, fewer jokes, more analysis. One insider described it best. He stopped being a prince playing a role and became a man designing an institution. But something else changed too: his relationship with his wife. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has long been heralded as the monarchy's greatest future asset. Regal, photogenic, unflappable. But during William's transformation, her role morphed too. She became his closest strategist. It wasn't just public appearances and fashion diplomacy. It was late-night meetings, drafting speeches together, reviewing diplomatic briefings. She even began taking solo calls with foreign heads of state, a task typically reserved for senior royals. This wasn't a consort in waiting. This was a queen in training. Together, William and Catherine began mapping out a modern monarchy: less pomp, more purpose, fewer ceremonial events, more policy-driven initiatives, less gilded imagery, more youth-focused outreach, mental health activism, and environmental stewardship. But not everyone in the palace approved. Traditionalists saw the shift as heretical. Where were the tiaras? The ballrooms? The endless charity galas? William was streamlining everything. He refused to live in Buckingham Palace. He pushed for a mobile court model, rotating residences and local community involvement. He wanted cameras out of the palace and tech hubs brought in, a modernization plan that Queen Elizabeth herself had quietly discouraged in her final years. And yet, William forged ahead. In fact, shortly after Charles's secret health briefing, William initiated what's now being called the Red Room sessions. These were closed-door roundtables, held at Kensington Palace, with just 5 to 7 participants at a time. Who was invited? Young policy experts, innovators, cultural leaders, philanthropists, former CEOs of major nonprofits. The goal? Design a monarchy fit for 2030. These weren't symbolic brainstorming sessions. They were strategic policy labs. William would sit for hours, taking notes, asking questions, pushing back. Sometimes Catherine would join. Other times, she hosted her own version. Blue Room sessions focused on children's welfare, education, and maternal health. They weren't just assuming power. They were constructing a monarchy in their image. But here's the twist. William wasn't doing this for attention. He deliberately kept these meetings secret. No press releases. No glossy photos. Just strategy. And according to palace insiders, that's what unnerved the older royals most. Not the fact that William was preparing for kingship, but that he was doing it without asking for permission. Because while Charles spent decades waiting, lobbying, and often compromising, William was acting, deciding, commanding. One aide reportedly said, "He's not waiting to be crowned. He's already started ruling." And it wasn't just within Britain. Multiple diplomatic sources have confirmed that William has been reaching out, privately, to foreign dignitaries. Some visits were arranged under the guise of charity partnerships or youth diplomacy. But the reality? He was establishing sovereign rapport, the kind of communication only monarchs traditionally handle. He visited Jordan, met with Scandinavian royals, hosted virtual roundtables with Commonwealth leaders, all without Charles. And then came the final piece of evidence, one that can't be denied. The day after his most recent Red Room session, William issued an internal directive that caught several staffers off guard. It read, "Begin Phase 1. Secure materials. Initiate discretion protocol. Advise Lord Chamberlain. Notify church liaison. What is phase 1? That's what everyone's asking. But speculation is rampant. Some believe it refers to a soft coronation, a rehearsed transition protocol that allows William to fully assume duties without triggering formal abdication. Others say it's a branding shift, an overhaul of the crown's digital image, portraiture, public documentation, and messaging to align with William's leadership style. Whatever it is, it's already begun. And William is at the center of it. He's no longer hiding in the shadows of tradition. He's building his own legacy, one quiet command at a time. But not all shadows are quiet. Because while William rises, someone else is watching. And he doesn't like what he sees. He believes he was born for this role, that the crown should never skip his place in history. He's been silent, but he's ready to speak. And when he does, the entire country will be forced to choose. What happens when two monarchs, one reigning, one rising, sit face to face in total silence, behind closed doors, with the weight of an empire pressing down on both of their shoulders? What happens when a son who's trained for the crown since birth, but never quite desired it, finds himself being handed the ultimate burden, not out of ceremony, but necessity? And what happens when a father, ill, weary, and slipping, must admit to himself that the crown he waited 7 decades to wear now feels heavier than he can bear? This was the scene at Sandringham. Not the grand halls, not the ballrooms, but the private study, doors locked, staff dismissed, curtains drawn. Only 2 men were present, Charles and William, the king, and the king-in-waiting. And it's here, according to multiple palace insiders, that the unimaginable happened. The moment no one thought would come, at least not this soon. Charles reached into his inner coat pocket, retrieved a folded document sealed with a wax insignia, and laid it on the desk between them. A letter of abdication, not addressed to Parliament, not addressed to the public, addressed to William. What followed, one source claimed, was a silence so thick, you could hear the clock ticking above them like a death knell. William didn't open the letter. He didn't move. He simply stared at his father. And for a long time, neither spoke. Because how do you begin a conversation that changes 1,000 years of continuity? That rips the crown off one head and places it, prematurely, on another? Eventually, Charles broke the silence. And what he reportedly said was staggering in its simplicity. It's time. Not I'm sorry. Not I can't go on. Not the doctors said. Just that. It's time. But what Charles didn't realize was that William had already known. He'd known from the last phone call, 3 weeks prior, when Charles slurred slightly through the phrase, state obligations. He'd known from the last joint appearance, when Charles's hands trembled visibly behind his back. And he'd known from the call he received, just hours before this meeting, from the king's lead physician, who reportedly said, "Your father needs rest." Indefinitely. And yet, knowing something and facing it are 2 different beasts. William took a breath. Then, for the first time in public memory, he whispered words that stunned even the man who had raised him. "I'm ready." There was no bravado, no excitement, no hunger, just gravity. That line, 3 simple words, changed the future of the British monarchy in that instant. But what came next? That's where things take a darker turn. Because Charles didn't nod. He didn't smile. He didn't hand the letter over with any sense of relief. Instead, he placed a trembling hand over the envelope and said something that sources have refused to repeat verbatim, except for this. "But there's more than you know." What did he mean? A scandal? A secret? A political crisis buried beneath the royal rug? Some have speculated it refers to an ongoing private matter between Charles and the Church of England, possibly linked to Charles's role as supreme governor and a constitutional conflict behind the scenes. Others believe it has to do with foreign leverage. Charles's quiet relationship with certain Middle Eastern leaders, which may now pose a diplomatic complexity as William prepares to step in. But the most whispered theory is the most personal one, that Charles was referring to someone else entirely, someone who could disrupt the line of succession if the truth ever came out. Because what if the monarchy's greatest secret was that the line to the crown might not be as secure as we believe? Whatever Charles meant, it stopped William cold. And for the next 30 minutes, the 2 men spoke not as monarch and heir, but as father and son. There were reports of tears, of raised voices, of Charles, at one point, gripping William's hand and saying, "You must do what I could not." And then, silence again. Eventually, William stood. He didn't take the letter. Not yet. Instead, he reportedly said, "Then tell them. All of them. Tonight." To which Charles replied, "No, not yet. It must look like your decision." And just like that, the strategy was born. A palace-wide plan to mask an abdication as a step back, to present it not as a failure of health, but as a generational transition for a modern monarchy. A soft shift with hard implications, but even that needed careful planning. Which is why, hours later, aides were summoned back into the estate with no explanation. Camilla was still in London, and had not been told. Neither had Edward. Not even the Lord Chamberlain. Only two other individuals were brought into the loop that night: the king's private secretary and the Archbishop of Canterbury. They were each handed a copy of the letter, each asked to begin drafting internal protocols for a Regency-style transition. No announcements, no media, no press, only silence. And then came the symbolic act. Charles, still seated, reportedly removed a signet ring from his right hand. The same ring that had once belonged to his grandfather, King George VI. He handed it to William, not with ceremony, not with fanfare, but with finality. William, shaken, did not place it on his own hand. He simply placed it in his coat pocket and left the room. It was just past 2 a.m. By morning, a palace bulletin was quietly released. His Majesty the King will be reducing public duties in the coming months. The Prince of Wales will represent the crown at key engagements. No explanation. No timeline. No further comment. But behind that diplomatic phrasing, the monarchy had changed. Forever. Because Charles would not resume public duties. And William would not stop at just representing. He would begin acting, ruling, deciding. But even as William began assuming power, one figure remained conspicuously absent from the equation: Queen Camilla. And when she found out what had happened while she slept, her fury would become a story in itself. But before that explosion, something else happened. Something that wasn't planned. Because later that same day, a staffer mistakenly handed William a second envelope. Also from Charles. Also sealed. But this one was different. It was older. The paper weathered. The wax cracked. And inside, a note addressed not to William, but to Harry. What happens when a woman spends decades clawing her way to the top of the monarchy, defying scandal, shame, and scorn, only to be told she's been left out of the most important decision of all? What does she do when she wakes up as queen consort and realizes the crown is already slipping through her fingers? That's the question Camilla faced. And according to insiders, she did not take it well. In fact, her reaction shook the palace. Because for all her calm public appearances, her polite smiles, and her carefully cultivated image as Charles's rock, Camilla's response to the secret Sandringham meeting was anything but composed. She wasn't just hurt. She was livid. Let's rewind. While Charles and William sat alone in that dark-paneled study, whispering the words that would begin a seismic royal shift, Camilla was fast asleep at Clarence House. She had been told Charles needed rest, and that he and William were having a private catch-up. She had no idea what was unfolding, no idea that her husband was about to effectively step down, and no clue that she would not be consulted or even informed. It wasn't until the following morning, over tea and newspapers, that Camilla learned the truth secondhand. Not from Charles, but from an aide. A junior aide, no less, who reportedly slipped up while briefing her schedule for the day and mentioned William's new directive over certain state matters. Camilla, stunned, asked for clarification. The aide froze. And then, a single line changed everything. The Prince of Wales has assumed temporary coordination of the king's calendar, effective immediately. According to palace staff, Camilla went silent for a full minute, then stood, then demanded to speak with Charles, at once. But Charles wasn't at Clarence House. He was already en route to Windsor with William. And when Camilla was told he wouldn't return until evening, that's when she exploded. Staff said they heard a raised voice, something that never happens with Camilla. She stormed through the halls, demanding to know who had authorized this transition, why she hadn't been briefed, and what exactly had been discussed. She called Charles directly. He didn't pick up. She called again, straight to voicemail. That's when she switched tactics. According to a trusted source, she rang the Lord Chamberlain and, with icy precision, asked him whether the Regency Acts had been invoked. The silence on the other end of the line was all she needed to know. Now let's pause here, because many have underestimated Camilla over the years, painted her as a sidekick, a background player. But make no mistake, Camilla is a seasoned strategist. She's navigated everything from being the other woman to becoming the queen consort. She didn't do that by being passive. And in this moment, she realized she was being cut out, not just from a conversation, but from the future. And she wasn't going to let it happen quietly. So, she called in her allies. Within hours, 3 of her most trusted confidants, senior figures from her private household, were convened for an emergency meeting at Clarence House. The topic? Crisis containment and counter-strategy. One insider, who spoke under condition of anonymity, said Camilla was devastated, but also calculating. She wasn't just reacting emotionally. She was preparing to fight, because this wasn't just about being left out. This was about legacy, position, control. Camilla had spent decades building a place for herself in royal history. She had endured the wrath of the public, the sting of press mockery, the haunting shadow of Diana. And after all that, she had finally made it. Crowned beside Charles, addressed as queen consort, accepted. And now, she was being sidelined, without a word, without a vote. So she did what any wounded royal with political instincts would do. She began gathering leverage. Her team quietly reached out to several senior courtiers loyal to her, figures from the Queen Mother's old guard, individuals who viewed Camilla as the stabilizing force in Charles's life. She also contacted at least 2 sympathetic members of Parliament, figures who had previously supported the modernization of Camilla's role in the Constitution. What was she hoping to do? Delay the transition, force transparency, maybe even challenge the legality of the private abdication document signed at Sandringham. Because here's the twist. While the monarch has enormous symbolic power, there are still legal procedures that must be followed. And Camilla was betting that a rushed, secretive handover, without full Privy Council involvement, might not hold up under scrutiny. But even as she plotted behind the scenes, there was a deeper pain that cut through the strategy. Charles hadn't told her, not even a whisper. And that, more than anything, devastated her. According to one source, Camilla sat in her private study later that day and wept, not out of fear of losing power, but out of heartbreak. After all they had been through, after all the secrecy, exile, and rehabilitation, he hadn't trusted her with the truth. It wasn't just a political betrayal. It was personal, and the emotional fallout had a ripple effect. The next morning, Camilla canceled a major public appearance, an event she had personally championed for a charity close to her heart. The palace cited unforeseen scheduling changes, but insiders knew the truth. Camilla was reeling. And yet, she wasn't giving up, because just days later, she made a bold move. At a private reception for literary figures, Camilla gave an unscripted remark. Seemingly casual, but loaded with meaning. She said, "Leadership is not always about succession. Sometimes it's about standing beside the one who needs you most." Many assumed she was referring to Charles's health, but those who knew the context understood it as a message, a warning. She was still here, still watching, still capable of shifting the narrative. And it wasn't just words. Because that same week, a rumor began circulating in select press circles. Something about a buried scandal involving a member of William's senior staff. Nothing substantiated. No names. But the timing was suspicious. Some believed Camilla was sending a signal. If she could be shut out, she could just as easily blow things up. And William? He knew. Sources claim he reached out to Camilla through an intermediary, a longtime advisor who had worked with both sides. The message? This is not personal. This is necessity. We can make space for you if you let the process continue. Camilla's response? She asked for a private meeting. Not with William, with Charles. And it was there, behind the walls of Windsor, that the queen consort confronted the king. We don't know everything that was said, but according to a senior courtier, one line was heard through the door, sharp and unmistakable. "Have you already given him everything? Including me?" It's unclear what Charles said in return. But hours later, Camilla was seen leaving Windsor alone. No security detail, no smile, no wave. And that same evening, she reportedly placed a personal call to Princess Anne. What was said? No one knows. But one palace insider left us with this chilling quote. They're aligning. And when Camilla and align, something always breaks. But what they're planning, that's the next twist in this story. Because Anne doesn't just want answers. She wants a seat at the table. And she's willing to fight for it. What do you call someone who isn't king by title, but already rules in everything but name? You call him the shadow monarch. And that's exactly what Prince William had become. He wasn't crowned. Not officially. No formal regency had been declared by Parliament. No gold-threaded proclamations from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. No grand announcement from the BBC. No statement on the royal website that outright called him king. And yet, the machinery of monarchy had already shifted into his hands. He was commanding the calendar. He was directing the advisors. He was making the calls. And most people, except the very top, were pretending nothing had changed. Because that was the strategy. Keep the optics smooth. Let the transition happen slowly, quietly, organically. Make it look like support. Call it a son stepping up. But behind that polished facade, behind every photograph, behind every signature, William was already moving as if the crown sat on his head. And make no mistake, he was moving fast. Faster than anyone expected. Let's go back to the day after the Sandringham meeting. Within hours of that fateful conversation with his father, William summoned his senior aides for a closed-door conference at Kensington Palace. The message was clear. From this moment forward, all coordination of state matters passes through me. Some aides reportedly balked. It was too soon, too blunt, too public. William didn't flinch. He doubled security around the crown's red boxes. He rerouted communication chains previously directed to Clarence House. He removed at least 2 longtime Charles loyalists from sensitive posts. Quietly, but decisively. And then came the biggest shock of all. He requested access to the Crown Confidential Vault. What is that? It's a little-known royal protocol. A secure, classified archive containing decades of state documents, private correspondence, and foreign briefings intended only for the reigning monarch and the designated sovereign-in-waiting. Most heirs don't get access until they're formally proclaimed. But William? He got in. Why? Because the Privy Council, those who were quietly briefed on Charles's condition, signed off on it. That's the first concrete clue the public never saw. That's when the constitutional handover, the invisible baton passing, truly began. From that point forward, William began making sovereign decisions. Not just attending ribbon cuttings or reading prepared speeches. Real decisions. Let's break a few of them down. First, the foreign calls. In the week following Charles's reduction of duties, William initiated 3 solo diplomatic calls with foreign leaders: Canada's Prime Minister, Australia's Governor-General, and the President of Kenya. These weren't just check-ins. They were sovereignty briefings. Each nation, technically still under the crown, must be kept informed of succession protocols and the king's health. Usually, these updates are delivered by the reigning monarch or through a neutral envoy. But this time, William did it himself. Why? Because he's already operating as the monarch. Second, the Privy Council session. Only days later, William chaired a private council meeting at St. James's Palace. Not attended. Chaired. No Charles. No Camilla. Just William, surrounded by senior cabinet members and the Lord President of the Council. Inside that room, he reportedly vetoed a minor diplomatic engagement Charles had scheduled for the following month, citing continuity of representation and future-forward optics. Translated, he didn't want Charles reappearing in public and confusing the narrative. Third, the documents. Perhaps the most damning evidence of all came in the form of a leaked dispatch box photograph. The red briefcase, iconic, regal, reserved for sovereign eyes only, was spotted in William's possession as he exited a private car outside Windsor Castle. The photo, which was quickly pulled from public distribution, showed something no one was supposed to see. A seal. Not the seal of the Prince of Wales, but the sovereign seal of state. This wasn't a mistake. This was a signal. William wasn't borrowing the powers of kingship. He was wielding them. And yet, no one called him king. Why? Because the branding hadn't been cleared. Because the lawyers were still reviewing constitutional pathways. Because the church needed to be notified. Because the Queen Consort was still furious. Because Parliament hadn't yet been briefed in full. But mostly, because Charles was still breathing. And so long as the monarch lives, Even a regency must be dressed in euphemism. Duty sharing. Support. Temporary oversight. Behind those phrases, William was assembling a government in waiting. He had begun reassigning advisors. He requested new briefings on digital policy, environmental strategy, and youth engagement. He held 2 off-the-books meetings with MI5, reportedly discussing anti-monarchy threats circulating on encrypted forums. And he ordered a complete review of the royal family's digital presence, instructing that future social media strategy should reflect a new generation of leadership. One aide who attended the meeting called it a digital coronation plan in slow motion. But all of this begged a dangerous question. If William is already ruling behind the curtain, how long can the curtain stay up? Because the public may be patient, but they're not blind. They see William's increasing visibility, his sharper language, his more decisive tone. They see Charles's sudden absences, his thin frame, his distant gaze. They see the photographs from engagements where William walks center frame, and Charles is nowhere to be seen. And they're starting to ask questions. Is William king? Has Charles stepped down? Why won't anyone tell us the truth? The palace's answer? Silence. And the longer that silence continues, the more volatile the situation becomes. Because the monarchy is built on illusion, an elegant, enduring fantasy of stability and permanence. But right now, that illusion is cracking, and William is doing everything in his power to control how the cracks are lit. One move in particular proves it. Behind the scenes, William has begun reviewing designs for updated sovereign iconography, new royal crest variations, new coin designs, even preliminary sketches for stamps, a task that only takes place once the monarch has either died or abdicated. And yet, here he is, ordering them. Even more bizarre, he's doing it without informing Charles. That's the moment one aide described as a break in the chain of reverence. Because until now, everything William had done was arguably just helpful, necessary, noble. But now, he was taking steps Charles hadn't authorized. He was moving ahead as if the crown were already his. And that's not support. That's power. That's rulership. That's monarchy. In the shadows. But nothing stays in the shadows forever. And as William steps forward, a ghost from the past is stirring. A woman who's been loyal, respected, overlooked, but never irrelevant. Princess Anne. And she's not happy. She just found out she was excluded from the Sandringham meeting. And she's demanding answers. What happens when the one royal who never wanted the crown finally demands a seat at the table? And not just any royal, but the royal, the steel spine of the family. The no-nonsense, duty-bound, title-shunning princess who has worked harder, stayed quieter, and sacrificed more than anyone else in the monarchy. Princess Anne. For over 5 decades, she's carried out thousands of engagements, upheld the late Queen's legacy, and never once complained about being pushed to the background. She didn't beg for press attention. She didn't leak to tabloids. She didn't rebel. But now she's furious. Because despite all her loyalty, despite all her work, despite being the only sibling who never brought scandal to the monarchy, and was left out of the most important decision in the modern history of the crown, Charles's secret abdication, she wasn't informed. She wasn't consulted. She wasn't even invited. And for Princess Anne, that's not just disrespect. That's war. It started with a phone call, and was in Gloucestershire, at her country estate, Buckingham Park, hosting a quiet equestrian fundraiser when the call came through. A discreet message from one of her most trusted palace aides. Your brother met with William at Sandringham. No staff present. Red Box was seen leaving. Camilla was not informed. Neither were you. And didn't react publicly. She didn't yell. She didn't slam the phone. She simply asked for a car. She was on the road to Windsor before the fundraiser had even ended. Because for Anne, this wasn't just about royal politics. This was personal. She had been there through Charles's entire reign. Supported him. Defended him. Advised him when everyone else, Camilla included, was falling apart. She was the first to fly to Scotland after the Queen's death. The one who personally escorted Elizabeth's coffin to London. She had earned her place in that room. And now she was being shut out? No. Not this time. When Anne arrived at Windsor Castle, she walked straight into Charles's private quarters. No prior notice, no permission. Witnesses say she demanded answers. And what she got back stunned her. Charles, tired and pale, reportedly told her, It's done. I couldn't wait. And was speechless. Then came the second blow. It was William's time. He's ready. And, normally composed to the point of icy detachment, allegedly responded, "He's not the only one who's ready." You should have told me. Charles didn't argue. But he also didn't apologize. That, more than anything, enraged her. Because the monarchy isn't about emotion. It's about process, duty, order, and leaving her out of something so monumental violated every sacred principle they were raised to defend. The conversation ended quickly and left the room, but her rage did not. Within 24 hours, she had summoned her own private meeting. Not with aides, not with staff, with Prince Edward, her younger brother, her fellow spare, the forgotten one. The two had rarely aligned politically, but this time, something shifted, because Edward had also been left in the dark, and he wasn't pleased either. Between them, and Edward possessed decades of institutional knowledge. They know the inner workings of the monarchy better than anyone else alive. And now, both had been boxed out by Charles and William. That made them dangerous. They began reviewing the Regency Acts themselves, requesting private briefings from legal experts, constitutional advisors, and even retired members of the Privy Council. They wanted to know, could the transition be contested? Did Charles have the legal right to begin a de facto abdication without the full consent of his siblings? Could the council be forced to review the legitimacy of the process? Meanwhile, Anne began reaching out, quietly, to a surprising new ally, Lady Louise Windsor, her niece, and not just any niece. The one Elizabeth always saw as the family's secret weapon. Lady Louise, now a university student with a reputation for intelligence and discretion, had reportedly been in quiet contact with Anne for months, ever since Queen Elizabeth's death. The two had met regularly for private chats, no aides, no fanfare, and saw in Louise something that reminded her of herself. Grace under pressure, duty without ego, and perhaps someone who could be elevated in the new order. Because while William and Kate were consolidating their nuclear unit, George, Charlotte, Louis, and was thinking longer term. What if the monarchy needed more than just a king and his children? What if it needed balance? And began floating an idea, internally only, for a new stabilization council, a kind of constitutional advisory group made up of working royals outside the immediate line of succession. She envisioned herself, Edward, Lady Louise, even Zara Tyndall, as part of it. It wasn't a power grab. It was a counterweight. But not everyone saw it that way. When William got wind of the proposal, he reportedly told aides, "She's building an opposition. We need to get ahead of this." And so began the quiet power play. William began redirecting certain engagements and had planned, assigning them to other royals without explanation. He reduced Edward's travel budget. He cut staff hours from Zara's charity liaison team. It was subtle, but intentional, and noticed. And she did not back down. In fact, she escalated. She made an unannounced appearance at a royal engagement in Belfast that was originally scheduled for William, after he canceled last minute. She didn't take his place. She just showed up, in uniform, decorated, smiling, holding a bouquet. The message was clear: I'm still here. I'm still relevant. Don't count me out. Later that week, she attended a Commonwealth event in Toronto where she gave a speech that caught everyone off guard. She said, "Legacy isn't built by inheritance. It's built by consistency. Not every leader wears a crown, but every leader shows up when it matters." The room fell silent. The press picked up the quote instantly. Speculation exploded. Was she taking a swipe at William? Was she publicly breaking with Charles? Was this the start of a constitutional crisis? Back in London, William reportedly confronted his father. He demanded a statement be released reaffirming the transition plan. Charles refused. He told William, "She's earned the right to speak. You need to listen." That didn't sit well, because while William respected Anne, he wasn't about to let her derail the new monarchy he'd begun building. So he made a move of his own. He invited Anne to Kensington Palace. A private lunch. Just the two of them. No staff. No agenda. What was said in that meeting remains a mystery. But two things happened afterward. First, Anne agreed to pause her stabilization council idea. Second, she received a new, expanded role, senior royal liaison to the Commonwealth, a position with more autonomy, more funding, and more influence than ever before. Was it a peace offering? or a tactical concession. Either way, the storm settled for now. But make no mistake, Anne's loyalty has limits. And if William slips, if he falters, if the new order begins to crack, she'll be there, watching, waiting, and ready to step back in. But before any of that can happen, another storm is brewing. Thousands of miles away, in Montecito, where Prince Harry has just found out that he's been left out of everything. And what he does next will shake the foundation. What do you do when you find out your entire family made the most consequential decision in royal history and didn't even bother to tell you? What do you do when your father, the king, effectively abdicates the throne? Your brother steps in to quietly become the most powerful man in the country, and you hear about it. Not from them, but from a stranger? That was Prince Harry's reality, and it shattered him. He had lived through betrayal before. Diana's death, the leaking of Meghan's pregnancy to the press, the tabloid abuse, the palace's cold silence during his darkest moments. But this wasn't just betrayal. This was obliteration. This was erasure. Because when the royal succession plan was quietly set in motion, when King Charles handed over the reins to Prince William behind closed doors, Harry wasn't even in the room, wasn't on the call, wasn't consulted. He wasn't just excluded from the process. He wasn't even considered. According to close sources, Harry found out about Charles's abdication secondhand, through his own security detail. Let that sink in. The man who was once the spare to the heir. The prince who stood beside William as a boy at their mother's funeral. The soldier, the brother, the son, reduced to a footnote in a palace memo. It started with a coded phrase intercepted during a routine briefing by his California-based security team. Regency process active. William directive confirmed. Charles stationary. The terms were vague, but Harry knew enough to recognize what they meant. He called Clarence House immediately. No answer. He tried William's private line. Voicemail. Then he called a former royal aide he still trusted. And the voice on the other end confirmed what he feared. Charles had stepped back. William was assuming sovereign responsibilities. The abdication letter had been drafted. The crown was shifting, quietly, legally, and irrevocably. Harry went silent. Then came the outburst. According to that aide, Harry began pacing, muttering, then shouting. They didn't even tell me. They didn't even tell me. For days, he spiraled. Canceled Netflix meetings. Stopped taking Meghan's suggestions for the Archwell Foundation. Ignored calls from Spotify about pending projects. He wasn't angry at the institution. He was angry at them. At him. William. His brother. His best friend. His protector. His anchor. Until he wasn't. Because for all the talk of family unity during the Queen's funeral, for all the Fab Four headlines and photo ops, this proved what Harry had feared all along. He was no longer family. He was a liability. And now, even as the monarchy reshaped itself for a new generation, Harry was in exile, living in Montecito, stripped of military honors. Frogmore revoked. Titles eroded. Now, he wasn't even trusted with the truth. What came next was unfiltered rage. According to a source close to Archwell, Harry went into what they described as a complete meltdown. He stormed through the estate, snapped at staff, locked himself in his home office for nearly 12 hours. At one point, Meghan knocked, asking if he wanted lunch. He didn't respond. That night, he opened a bottle of tequila and sat on the back patio alone. He scrolled through British tabloids on his phone. Not a single word about the transition. Nothing on Charles. Nothing on William. The palace had kept it airtight. But Harry? He had sources too. He began calling them. Former protection officers. Ex-paparazzi contacts. Reporters who owed him favors. What he heard was devastating. The decision had been made weeks ago. The palace had known for months that Charles was deteriorating. William had begun preparing for the handover long before anyone told the public. Or Harry. It wasn't just a health crisis. It was a strategy. And Harry hadn't even been given a seat at the table. The rage turned to despair. That's when he did something unexpected. He called her. Queen Camilla. They hadn't spoken in months. Their relationship had always been strained. He blamed her for Diana's misery, for the way she navigated the public after Charles's rise, for the way she subtly sidelined Meghan during the brief time the Sussexes were still active royals. But that night, he needed answers. She answered the phone with a single word. Harry. He didn't wait. He demanded to know why he'd been excluded. Her response? You chose your path. That was the dagger. Because for Harry, choosing independence wasn't the same as choosing abandonment. He never imagined his father would cut him out completely. He thought the ties would stretch, not snap. And Camilla? She made it worse. She added, "William's been preparing. You've been away." It was a polite evisceration, and it sent Harry over the edge. He hung up. No thank you. No goodbye. Just silence. He turned to Meghan and said something chilling. "I'm not going back. Not now. Not for anything." That night, he began drafting a statement. He planned to go public, to reveal everything. The secret abdication, the Sandringham meeting, the cover-up. He even considered publishing private texts between him and William, ones that showed how little his brother had told him. But Meghan stopped him, at first gently, then firmly. According to a source close to their circle, Meghan told Harry, "You do this, and they'll shut every door. Forever." He didn't care. He said, "Maybe that's what I want." But that wasn't true. Not really. Because beneath the anger was grief. The little boy who lost his mother. The man who was losing his family. Again, for the last time. So instead of publishing the statement, Harry did something else. He made a phone call. To one person. To the one person who had once promised to always tell him the truth. Princess Anne. And what she told him was worse than he expected. Because she didn't just confirm the transition. She revealed something else. Something she found in Charles's private study. A sealed letter. Addressed to Harry. Written weeks ago. By Charles himself. What did it say? That's the next twist. Because Harry's about to open it. And what's inside could detonate everything.